Hey, what's going on, you guys? Welcome back to Forgiven AF podcast. Remember, this is a second chance podcast that we use as marketing material for our mentorship program. And this weekend, y'all, we had a back to school barbecue and it was freaking awesome. We had 12 boys show up. We had about 8 or 9 mentors show up and their family. And it was just really cool to spend time with these kids and celebrate them before they go back to school and give them their talks to, about how important school is and how it's just, how important it is to follow through and to make it through this stage. Because, it's a tough stage for some of these boys right now, but they're really making, big steps in the right direction, and we're really proud of them. And then that's really it for that. But now to today's show. So a few months ago, probably about a month or so ago, I'd say, Stephen Wilson, who is the head prison pastor for Gateway Church, invited me to go with him to a graduation that they were having for a recovery house program in Texas State Jails, or TDCJ, right? Mm-hmm. And it was absolutely awesome to see the change in these men. And while I was there, I ran into a guy who, you guys will see in a minute. When you speak to him, you're just going to be able to tell that, he's radiating God's love. And a lot of these men in prison, the way he dedicates his life to these men in prison, and sometimes it's not the most rewarding thing. Sometimes you actually, we'll let him talk about that. I just know the reason I want to bring you on, for one, Wayne, is to thank you for what you do, because when I went to prison, there was a guy that came every week and sat at a table by himself. A lot of the weeks he had no engagement. A lot of the weeks this man was just sitting there by himself. And sometimes he would come and people would go sit with him. And after a few weeks of him coming, what attracted me to go and, start a conversation with him was his consistency. Like I feel like if I would have gone in a couple weeks and no one came and talked to me, I would have been like, all right, this isn't for me. But this guy was there consistently, and I went and talked to him. And because of him sharing, the gospel with me, that was literally like a huge catalyst in me finding God. So when I see you and you interacting with these men, it just reminded me of that. And I was very thankful for that, So Wayne Edson runs a nonprofit called Inside the Wire. First of all, Wayne, thank you for being here. Could you kind of tell my listeners just a quick, kind of who you are and where you're from type?
Yeah, Shawn. So I'm originally from New Orleans, Louisiana. Probably about the age of 4 years old, I moved to Texas. So I'm really a Texan. I grew up in San Antonio, Texas. Lived in San Antonio through my freshman year of college. Transferred then back to New Orleans, went to Tulane. And when I graduated college, then I took off in the oil patch, and I've been in Houston, San Antonio, Midland, Denver, and Dallas. And I retired out of the oil business in Dallas.
That's awesome. So I didn't even know that about you, that you were in the oil field for all that long. Can we talk? So we've talked about a couple things over the past few weeks of us getting to know each other, and some of it is just so impactful and so important to be heard, and that's why I wanted to bring you on the show. So I'm going to kind of just point you in directions that I would like to go, if you're okay with it. If there's anything that I asked you about that we've talked about that you're not really comfortable with, I don't think that that's going to be the case, because I know you're about helping people. So are you comfortable with sharing with us kind of like your family and parents' dynamics growing up?
Sure. So, like I said, I was born in New Orleans. I believe probably around the age of 2, my parents separated. And then my mother remarried, and I believe it was around the age of 4. My sister and I have a sister who's 11 months older than I am. We moved to Texas. We were... we had a good family. We had a mother and a father at home, middle class. My stepfather used to run a bar. He had a nightclub. Then after that, he was a builder. So for many years, and probably up until the time that I got through school, he was a builder. I worked, summers with the crew, learned a lot of Hispanic, a lot of Mexican talk that I probably can't repeat because I was in construction. But anyhow, yeah, so that was our early life. one of the things about my early life that I think, and I've been able to use this story to help other men in prison, because I run across so many men, Shawn, in prison who have not had a good relationship or no relationship. So as I said, my parents divorced when I was about 2 years old. I never ever heard again from my father after that. And so during early years and, early teen years, my sister and I both always would wonder, well, why in the world did our father never call us? Why did we never see him? Why did we never get a birthday card? Why did we never get Christmas? And we went on. And what that instilled in me was really almost a hatred for my natural father, because I didn't know. I thought, well, what was wrong with me? Why would he, what did I ever do that he would never want to talk to me? When I was 41 years old, I had moved back to Texas, I believe in 1989. And shortly after I moved back to Dallas from Denver, I was contacted by his younger brother. And when I first got contacted, I thought, well, I don't want to even go see this guy. But he said, please come out. He lived outside of Longview in Gilmer. So I said one day, well, I'm going to be doing business in Tyler. When I get through with my business, I'll come over. So when I went to meet with him, we had coffee. I had a lot of questions, and I just hit him right off the bat. What did I ever do to my father that he didn't want any contact with me? And my uncle kind of looked shocked, and he said, you don't know? And I said, no. He said, well, your father killed himself. So shortly after my parents divorced, my father committed suicide. Well, it took me probably a year and a half or 2 years to process that. My sister and I were we talked and we're like, wow, maybe this is starting to make a little sense. I asked her, I said, well, during that period of time, we actually had contact, I think 2 times with his parents. My grandparents came from California, but nobody ever discussed the story, the elephant in the room, if you will. So when we finally found this out, it took me probably a year and a half. And I talked to some friends that were in recovery, and I said, how do I make amends, for my part? Because I felt like I had to make amends and ask forgiveness for the false impression that I had on my father.
For all the years you had the anger and resentments.
Yeah, all the resentments that I had. So I had to say, okay, so what I had to do, he was already, he was buried. I couldn't go, see him and ask for forgiveness. So what I did is I wrote a letter, and that was between me, him, and God. And after that, just destroyed the letter, and I just handed it over to God.
That's good. You could tell that that's definitely a big part of working those steps too, is making those amends and getting that cleared off your conscience, so that that can keep you from relapsing and going back to, shame. Because one thing that really made me sad, almost tear up, was when you were saying at a kid and you're wondering, what did I do to make my dad not want to come around? What did I do? Think about how many boys in the United States are living right now without fathers. And I wonder, if you felt that way, I wonder how many other boys feel like it's their fault that their dad's not around. Do you know what I mean? Or even little girls, that's just got to be a tough way to live, especially when it's not very rational. You know what I mean? What could a 2-year-old kid have done to cause their parents to not want to be around? So first of all, I'm sorry that you had to deal with that. That would definitely be tough. But being able to use that now and share with other little boys that it's not them, you know what I mean?
Well, and Shawn, what's really interesting too, so this was in 1989. And I have been able to use this in prison ministry because I meet so many men in prison who have that same type of broken relationship, dysfunctional relationships, family relationship. So, God took my mess and made it into a message.
Yeah.
And, in 1989, I had no idea that I would be spending as many years as I've spent in prison going in and ministering with.
That's so good, man. And I can't wait to really dive into the prison ministry thing, because that's a hard thing to get into with not a whole bunch of, congratulations, good job. You know what I mean? People just don't really want to know what's going on inside of prisons. One last thing before we move on to the childhood thing, and we talked about this in the truck a little bit ago, was there's so many men and women nowadays who haven't had that good, solid, loving father in their life, that when, the Bible or a pastor is saying, God loves you like a father, they don't understand that and have that connection that, like, I did have. When I heard a pastor say, God loves you as much as your dad, that was extremely powerful to me, because I had a father that loved me more than anything else I can think of, Yeah. So a lot of kids nowadays don't have that, which makes it harder for them to come to God when they're going through that same sort of situation.
You're right. I mean, a young man, I don't know how many men I have met in prison that will tell me, hey, my father abandoned me or whatever. And it's a hard concept. The theological answer is, hey, we live in a broken world, but it's easy to project that projection onto God, the Father. But when we really show man that the truth, that God is a God of love, those walls and barriers, they break down.
Yeah, that's so true. Like, God is not sitting up there staring down at you like, aha, I knew you were going to do that, or gotcha. You know what I mean? A lot of people look at God like he's up there just watching for us to mess up. And that's just really not the case. So prison ministry, how did you got into prison ministry originally with Kairos, right?
Right.
And can you kind of explain to me, or I kind of know now from you telling me, but what is Kairos?
Okay. So Kairos Prison Ministry is about one of the oldest prison ministries. It's about 70 years old. It's based on the same weekend experience as a walk to Emmaus or a Tres Dias or a Crucillo. We go in the Michael unit where I'm at. We're on weekend. We will be in October on weekend 59. So we do 2 weekends a year, so you can see how many years we've been doing it.
That's awesome.
I started on weekend 44. I had a good friend who I knew through recovery that kept asking me, go into prison. And he said, you've got so much to give. And I was like, no, I don't need to go to prison. I was one of these, I don't know, ultra conservatives or whatever that thought, hey man, they did the crime, they're doing the time. What do I need to go in there? But I'll never forget, he was leading a weekend, team leader on weekend 44. And we were in actually a Families Anonymous meeting with him due to the fact of history of recovery in my family. My oldest son is on his 30th year of sobriety right now.
Oh, that's awesome.
Awesome.
Congratulations.
But anyhow, we knew this family through recovery, and he said, hey, we're getting ready for this weekend, and I don't have enough guys. And I said, well, why don't you ask me? And he said, well, I asked you for 2 years. So I went in, and that Thursday, we went in on a Thursday through Sunday. And I know I called my wife Thursday night, and I'm like, wow, this is not what I expected. And by the time that weekend was over with, and I got home, and my wife was like, something changed. Something changed in you. And it was God. because God showed me that I really needed, this is the place where we always look and say, where can we minister? And what God showed me is my ministry had to be inside the wire, inside those, and it's not the friendliest place, as you know. We've got all kind of obstacles. We have COs we have wardens sometimes that don't, like, hey man, you're a hug-a-thug. What are you doing in here?
Hug-a-thug, that's so good. Let me hit on a couple of things because that's awesome. One thing that's awesome is that you kept saying no to going into the prisons, right? You're like, no, no, no. You were thinking of it as like, I don't need to go help them. You know what I mean? But it's so funny how God can flip the whole switch and you get in there and realize, oh God, you wanted me in here for me.
Exactly.
Like, you wanted me in here so I could learn things and I could become a better person. It wasn't just about me going to help them. Exactly. And it's so funny how sometimes we can get more out of helping. I get more out of helping these boys in our program than they get, I'm sure.
Amen.
Like, it keeps me energetic. It keeps me happy. It keeps me out of trouble because I know that I can't let them down. Mm-hmm. It's like I get more out of it than they do sometimes. So one thing that I want to touch on, because it's very important to me, is diversity and race, right?
Right.
Can we talk about how y'all set up the Kairos?
Yeah. So what I really love about Kairos, and I kind of knew this going in, but my first experience of it was really pretty amazing. Unlike Walks to Emmaus or Tres Dias, which are outside programs where anyone can sign up for it, or you're usually sponsored by someone else. In the Kairos prison ministry, the men are normally picked by the chaplaincy and the wardens. And they try to pick the both positive and negative leaders for the weekend. But what they do is they pick 14 white, 14 black, and 14 Hispanic for every weekend. So every time we go in and do a weekend with 42 men, we have an equal mix. And you say, well, why is that? Well, as you probably remember, know from prison, if you're not familiar with the prison, races don't mix in prison.
It's the most segregated thing I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
And it's not healthy segregation. It's us versus them a lot. It's very, have each other's back. And just the fact that you guys, the Kairos is set up that way, they even set it up all the way down to the tables.
Right.
So like, it's basically white, black, Hispanic, white, black, Hispanic. And it's so important because if you're going to teach the love of Christ and you're going to get people to follow the Holy Spirit, you have to realize that like it's like heaven. We're all going to be there. So why are we waiting till we get there to live that way, Exactly.
I mean, when these guys come in and on Friday morning when they sit down with their table family and they look across that table, you could see the look like, what is going on here? Why am I sitting next to this guy, and all my homies over there or whatever, but it's that beginning of breaking that down and getting these guys comfortable with each other.
It's so good.
And, just like in your Tres Dias experience that you had when after you listen to a talk, that 15 or 20 minutes of bonding together as a family. And so now you've got, a white guy and a black guy and a Hispanic guy, and they're all like, okay, well, here's what I think. Here's what I think, So it's really, it's in my opinion, it's one of the best ministries, prison ministries, as far as breaking down these barriers, and keeping these men together.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. I actually didn't even know that much about it. And since I've done Tres Dias, I'm actually would be able to go serve in Kairos.
Yes.
See, I need to look into that because I would absolutely love that.
Yeah.
Now, you guys don't stay in the prisons Thursday through Sunday, do you?
No, we basically are there probably 12 hours. Our normal schedule, we go in on Thursday afternoon around 2:00. We usually have the men from about 2 to 6. On Friday mornings, we go in and like at 6 in the morning, we get the men out, after count or before count. We usually have them from about 7 in the morning till about 6 in the evening. During their experience, they're here all the talks. and we're upfront with them. We're Christians. We're but we're not forcing it down anyone's throat.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk to them about what God has done in our lives, and we share with them those experiences. But we're also known as the cookie ministry. We bring thousands of cookies into the prison every time we do a weekend.
That's funny.
And everyone, I mean, the correctional officers, everybody's like, oh, here come the cookies, And these guys, eat cookies after cookies after cookies to where they get sick. But, it's just something to start breaking it down. And what they don't realize is the beginning of showing God's agape love. That here's someone from the outside who doesn't know these guys from Adam is bringing all this stuff in. And the meals these guys get.
Do they do like special meals?
Oh, yeah. The meals we make, we have an outside team that prepares all these meals for these men. And they eat things during the Kairos weekend that they never get in prison. And that is just something that just blows them away. I mean, they're like, oh my gosh, I ate 8 chicken breasts, or whatever. So, but no, it's a combination of talks, loving on them, and just feeding them some food that, is just amazing food. What do they say? A way to a man's heart is through his stomach.
That's awesome. Okay, let's see. And then, so aside from Kairos, you also do the recovery program, the Overcomers program?
Yeah.
And then how often is that? So
I did Kairos for about 3 years. And on Kairos, we do the 2 4-day weekends a year. And then on Tuesday nights, we do what we call prayer and share. And then on the second Saturday of every month, we have the team come back in and visit with the guys. After about my 3rd year of doing Kairos, the chaplain asked me to become what they call a certified volunteer chaplain. So I went through additional training to do that. That really allows me, I'm really just like a chaplain on the unit right now. Yeah. I handle keys. I can go anywhere on the unit.
Oh, that's cool.
I'm not restricted. I go into SAG. I go into hospice or wherever. I can go all over the unit. But it allows me to be able to teach a recovery class.
That's cool.
So I teach Overcomers Recovery. Overcomers Recovery, it's a 90-day recovery program. I take them through the 12 steps. It's a Christ-centered recovery program.
That's cool.
I do that basically 3 times a year. I used to do it year-round, and about 5 years ago, I got so hot during the summer, I was in the hospital for, I believe, 3 days because of just, heat related. I was telling your friend earlier today, the sad thing is we treat animals in this country better than we do men in Texas prisons.
Yeah.
I mean, it gets up to 140 degrees up in some of those cells.
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, it's about to be 110 today. They don't have no windows.
No.
It's just that's miserable.
It's just blowing hot air.
Yeah.
They have fans that just blow hot air.
Like wet their sheets down and
I mean, a lot of the guys that have figured out, hey, you can make a little tent, take your sheet, wet it down, run a little string, get under it like a tent. And if you are fortunate enough to have commissary and have a little fan, personal fan, you can blow that in there and cool you down. But it's still miserable in there.
It's still miserable. Yeah, that's tough. Okay, now this is probably the most impactful part of this whole podcast, to me anyways, and I want to get into. And that's about sharing an impactful story that's happened to you since you've been in prison.
Okay.
And this story, I could listen to you say it over and over again. You know where I'm going.
Yeah.
How do you want to start? How do you start that?
Okay, so I was preparing for a Kairos weekend, and we did the weekend in October of 2014. I believe it was in early September of 2014. I was diagnosed with squamous cell cancer on my head. I had a spot, and they said, okay, you got to get you in and do Mohs surgery. part of my pride was like, no, I'm not going to go get my surgery done before I do this Kairos weekend. I don't want to be going into prison with a big hole in my head, open hole and all that. So I just kind of said no. So really, my wife and I were the only people that really knew, and my kids, they knew, okay, Dad's got to go have this surgery for this squamous cell cancer that can lead into more, evasive cancer if you don't take care of it. So I kept this secret, even from my team members that went in. And I went in and did the whole weekend. Sunday night, I'm driving my car back from the prison. And if you ever read the story of Jacob wrestling with God, that's similar to what it was. In my car ride, the Holy Spirit was convicting me all the way back, 2-hour drive to Dallas. And the Holy Spirit was like, Wayne, you just spent 4 days with these men sharing about Jesus, but you didn't ask them to pray for you. And I'm like going, oh my gosh, you know what? And when I look back on it now, Shawn, it was pride. It was my pride. I didn't want these guys knowing. But I got home that night, and it was probably, by the time we ended the Kairos event and packed everything up, got out of there, it was probably 9 o'clock at night. I got home, and I was, after that 4-day weekend, you're exhausted.
Yeah.
I sat down, and my wife says, hey, let's go to bed. And I said, honey, I've got to write 6 letters. So I wrote the 6 men at my table. I wrote them a letter, and I told them, I said, first of all, I said, I want to apologize. I said, I held something back from you guys. And I said, I've been diagnosed, and I'm going to have to go in November and have surgery on squamous cell, Mohs surgery. Well, this, on November the 8th, I go into the prison for a second Saturday. We probably had about 200 men there that day. And those 6 men had already spread it around. By the time I got there, there was like 200 men. They're like, man, we want to pray for you. And when we finished the event, we set a chair up in the middle of 7 Gym where you were that day for that deal. I'm sitting in a chair. I've got all these men surrounding me, men in white. They're praying over me, anointing me with oil. I have no idea where the oil came from. I don't want to even know where the oil came from. But anyhow, they prayed for me. And so this was November the 8th. November the 18th, I go in 5:30 in the morning for my surgery. And I go in and I sit down. They get me in, sit me in a chair, getting ready to start the surgery. And the surgeon's like, something's not right. And I'm looking at him like, what do you mean? He says, he tells the nurse, bring me the file. So when I was diagnosed in September, they took a picture of the spot. The surgeon's like looking, and he goes, something ain't right here. I said, this spot, I don't even see the spot right now. He said, but I've got the picture. He said, so we're going to do another biopsy. He said, but I'm going to take and just instead of the biopsy, he said, I'm going to take a layer out of your skin and we're going to biopsy it. So we did. I went back in the waiting room. They do it right there on spot. So my wife and I are in this waiting room, and there's other people getting Mohs surgery, and we're praying with people, and the nurse finally calls him back, says, Mr. Edson, come on back. And this is how the devil works, Shawn. It wasn't 100 feet from that waiting area to the little room I go into. And the little devil's on my shoulder going, see, God doesn't work. God doesn't care about you. Prayer doesn't work. They're going to go in and they're going to take more of your head away, and this isn't over with. But when I sat down in that chair, it was like the peace just flooded over me. I sat down in that chair, and the nurse says, well, we're going to bandage you up to go home. And then the doctor walks in, and the doctor says, Mr. Edson, he says, I don't know how to explain this. I said, what? He says, there is no cancer.
God, I'm trying not to cry. And you told me that story 3 times.
Yeah. So I look at the doctor and the nurse, and I said, well, let me tell you something. I said, about a little over about 10 days ago, I was in prison and I had a bunch of men pray for me about this cancer. And I told them the whole story about getting anointed with oil. And the more I'm talking, Shawn, the more this nurse, her mouth is just dropping open, like looking at me like, what is going on here? This guy's in prison. He's got men in prison praying over him. And the doctor's like looking at me and he's like, okay, you're nodding his head. And so they patch me up. I show them tell them about Kairos, my little wristband that I've got now. At that time, I didn't have a wristband, but I tell them all about Kairos and tell them about these men. And so it just so happened, November the 18th, 5:30 in the morning is when I went in for surgery. November the 18th, that night was prayer and share in the micro unit. So I go home, and around 2 o'clock, I'm like, honey, I've got to go down to the prison. And she's like, no, you just had a big hole in your head, and you got this big bandage. I said, honey, I've got to go tell the man. So I go down to the prison, and it was cold that November. I'm hoping it's cold again. Have a stocking cap on. I pull it off, and I've got this big bandage on my head, and everybody's looking. And I said, hey, guys, you see this bandage on my head? And they're like, yeah. I said, well, this is not what you think it is. I said, this is God's victory. They look at me, and I tell them the whole story. Because when we got through and we were getting ready to leave, the surgeon actually came out of his office. He said, Mr. and Mrs. Edson, I want you to tell those men prayer worked.
Oh, man. That's, I was going to ask you about that too, and let me try to do it without crying, but a lot of times they say it's hard for doctors and lawyers and educated people like that to believe in God because they've been so taught through education and, cause and effect and black and white, right? So to hear the surgeon come out and say that is pretty powerful.
Well, and I don't know if the surgeon was a Christian or not. He was an Indian.
Yeah.
His name was Dr. Gupta.
He saw something happen.
But he saw something happen and he heard it. But it's really, really amazing. So I go in there. This is November the 18th, and I'm sharing my story, and I'm encouraging these men. I'm saying, look at what you did. Look at what God answered your prayers. And as I'm getting ready to leave, there was a young man who sat at my table during that Kairos. He goes, Mr. Wayne, he said, did you get my letter? And I said, his name was Brandon. I said, no, Brandon, I haven't seen your letter because, the letters from the men have to go to a safe place. And I didn't have a P.O. box back then. I didn't have my ministry set up. So they were going to my church. So I get his letter on November 23rd. And I'm reading this letter. And I'm looking at it. It was written November the 14th. I'll never forget this. And in his letter, he's talking about not only, he was part of the people that prayed for me November 8th, but he's showing me how the woman with the issue of blood, just by faith, reached out and touched the cloak of Jesus and was healed. He goes, just like that story, you're going to be healed. He said, but you're not only going to be healed, you're going to tell your testimony to hundreds about your healing. Well, see, I read this letter and I'm like, whoa. I've already given my testimony to like 200 men in the Michael unit.
Yeah.
And really since then, so this is in November 2014. For about 2-3 years, I gave my story several times to youth groups at church.
Yeah.
I gave it to other groups. And then in 2016, my wife and I felt like God wanted us to move to Gateway. And that's, I moved to Gateway. Pastor Stephen Wilson knew my story. And he's like, man, you need to share your story. And Gateway at that time had what they called Gateway People Magazine stories. So my wife and I went down and we shared my testimony, and it's been published in Gateway People.
That's awesome.
So from 200 to probably hundreds of thousands,
yeah,
have heard my testimony. And what's amazing, Shawn, like you say, when I resisted doing prison ministry because I thought, why do I want to do this? God blessed me more than I could ever be blessed.
Isn't that cool?
And so that really started me on the road that I'm on now of making Inside the Wire prison ministry. We now have Gateway in the Michael unit, and we will be doing now through Gateway some of the things that I was able to do through Inside the Wire, Day with Dads, marriage conferences, things like that. But
but it's not like Gateway come and took over. It's kind of like you guys locked on.
No. It's really a funny story because when I met Pastor Stephen Wilson, he wasn't really on Gateway staff at that time. He was G3 Prison Ministries.
Okay.
And he and I are talking, and he's like, "So you're at the Michael unit?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "You're one of the volunteer chaplains?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Man, I've been trying to get in the Michael unit." I said, "Well, what's the problem?" He goes, the chaplain just doesn't respond. I said, "Well, let's take care of that." So I brought Pastor Stephen in, introduced him to the chaplain, introduced him to the warden, and that was really kind of the beginning. They didn't take over.
Yeah.
But it was Pastor Stephen helped me get the materials together to do Day with Dads, and Gateway covered the cost of it.
That's what I love about what the Gateway's doing is they're really willing to lock arms and just help anybody that you know what I mean? Especially the finances, what they're doing to redo so in the Michael unit, there's a hospice wing, which is the people, they're all on their deathbed. And it's really, really sad. We walked through it and, just a wave and a smile to some of these people, you could just see them light up. Like you know what I mean? I know they have one or two, what do you call them? Like not a liaison, they're like janitors /
No, they're it's a new program, and it's really an awesome program. It's called No Man Die Alone.
So they're in there.
And they're in there. They used to be SSIs in the prison. They used to be, janitors keeping the hospice clean. But now Director Carter saw these men and saw what they were doing, and they actually did a training program for them. So it's no man left, dies alone.
It's so cool because these men are just in this hospice bed. A lot of them are, missing limbs from diabetes and just different things and it's really hard to walk through and see because you can tell they're on their last leg. But Gateway is now coming through and redoing all of their little library. They gave them all nice TVs in their own rooms. They're redoing the patio where they can be rolled out and hang out on the patio. Yeah. It's just a really cool thing that Gateway's doing to help those men be able to, die in peace and feel God's love, in prison.
And I've heard from Pastor Stephen Wilson that when Pastor Robert Morris heard about the hospice unit, he's like, "Wow, what an amazing place!" You talk about this is their last. If they don't know Jesus by now, this is their last opportunity for us to reach them. Yeah. And so, we're that hospice unit is. There's only 2 hospice units in the whole state.
Oh, I didn't know that. Not every prison has one of those?
No. There's only 2.
And it's expensive because they have to actually have like a full-time nursing staff.
Yeah, there's a full-time hospice staff there that has to be there. So it is an expensive program. Yeah. But the really sad thing, Shawn, is we're Region 2 in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. So we get a lot of men from the other prisons in Region 2 that are just basically on their deathbed. They don't send them into hospice until they're we get guys that come in there, and if they last 24 hours.
Oh, so it's not like a hospice that a regular person would go on. It's more of like a last minute of the hospice part.
Yeah.
So that's kind of sad to know, but at least they have something better than dying in the unit by themselves and the heat and just they wouldn't even make it. A lot of the guys that I saw in there wouldn't make it anymore.
Oh no, not in general population. I mean, because it's a better environment. It's air conditioned. Like say, they try to keep it clean. There's nurses there. There's mentors that help them. There's No Man Die Alone.
Yeah, that's
guys.
A cool program.
They have video. They have Gateway put flat screens in each of their rooms.
Yeah,
they can either watch programs or they have most of them have Bluetooth or DVD. So.
That's so awesome. Real quick, because before I forget this, and sometimes I do, and I want to make sure I don't. If anybody is interested in supporting the Inside the Wire ministry, or has any questions or like to find a way to donate, what would be a good way for them to contact?
So right now we're in the process, Shawn, of getting a website put together for Inside the Wire. Inside the Wire, it's a 501c. It was actually approved in February of 2019 by the IRS, and then you know what happened. March of, within months of it getting approved and trying to get it kicked off, COVID hit. And even though I was a volunteer chaplain, Shawn, I was not allowed to come into the prison for probably about 14 months because they had to close that environment off. So now that all this is over with, we're trying to get it going again. Right now, the best contact for me is insidethewire@gmail.com. And then we will be getting a website soon. We've got web people that are working on it right now, putting the web together.
Let me know when you have that done, and I'll make sure that all of our listeners get that website.
Right.
So they can be able to find you and keep up to date with what you're doing.
Yeah. And the money, the money for Inside the Wire, really, it's just to help me to continue. I'm retired. I'm 75 years old. I'm living on Social Security, but it helps me cover my costs. I'm down there every week. In the prison.
2 hours away. I don't know if we even touched that. The Michael unit, was it 2.5 hours away?
From my house to the Michael unit, if I just barely go over the speed limit, it's an hour and 50 minutes.
Hour and 50? Yeah.
Hour and 50 minutes from my front door to the Michael unit. It's an hour and 50. By the time I do my round trip, it's around 230 miles.
Yeah.
So, but I just really feel like it's something that I've committed to do. I teach recovery in general population. And I teach recovery in recovery housing. I also do Bible study fellowship, which I was one of the first Bible study classes in a prison, in the Texas prison system, probably about 5 years ago. Now I think we've got 4 or 5 different units throughout the state that are doing Bible study.
That's awesome.
So we do that from September to May, every week from September to May. And when summer hits, I'm still there on every Wednesday, but I'm not doing classes. I'm just going around the unit, praying with guys in close custody. I love to go back to close custody because those are the guys that never get out.
Yeah, and they're lonely and
just they're and just to go back there and encourage them. I mean, just to give them a quick word of encouragement. Or I go into recovery housing, and then I'll see guys in the chapel area. And then, of course, every Wednesday night now, we have our Gateway campus. So that runs from about 4 to 6 every Wednesday night.
That's when they have service, the Gateway?
We have the Gateway service. So Gateway has an awesome vision for the prison ministry. It is a full-blown campus. I mean, they have the same projector inside the Michael unit that we have in Dallas, at our Dallas campus. We have audio, they have top of the line, and these guys get to see the message that their family is seeing.
Oh, they stream that same service that they
The
see?
very
That's
same
awesome.
service that the family would see. If you go to gatewaypeople.com and watch a service, that's a service that we're going to show in the unit.
That's so cool.
And that way the men can contact their family and go, man, I just saw this, or the family can say, did you see that?
Yeah, they can actually be kind of enjoying it together, going through it together. That's awesome.
Yeah.
One of the things that Stephen Wilson showed me when we were there, they built out a full-on radio station podcast. Right. I'm talking top-of-the-line stuff. Yeah. They spent $20,000 or something on this equipment to where these men can learn how to produce, they can learn how to speak on microphones, they can learn how to do their editing, they can learn how to broadcast stuff out through either podcast or the radio station. It's such a cool thing that they're doing to provide opportunities for these men to learn how to do it. One thing also, before I wrap this up, I got one question for you. I'm not going to let you off the hook without the last one. But in the units, they have where the people who are in this recovery housing program get to stay in their own private special dorm.
What? Yeah.
Right?
Okay. So what they did, Shawn, is they took 4-building D-pod, one section, and they assigned the recovery housing to that one pod. So that pod is 24 cells.
Yeah.
And you got 2 men per cell. But they've really got about 45 men in there because the mentors have their own, they have a single cell.
That's cool.
But those men took those cells, that pod, and just, I mean, they scrubbed it down. When you walked in there, you saw a shiny cement floor.
The cleanest thing I've ever seen.
It's the cleanest place in prison you can imagine because the men took pride in there.
There you go.
Gateway gave them all chairs, and so every time they got their name on the chair, this is their chair while they're in that recovery
really cool.
housing.
And when you give someone that sort of responsibility with a nicer dorm like that, they even kind of enforce their own rules. You know what I mean?
They do.
Like even above and beyond, like, hey, let's make sure that we keep everything spotless and clean. Let's make sure that we're cleaning the microwave after we use it or what, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas in, regular population dorms, you don't have that same respect.
Oh, no.
So it was really cool. And the way the races were all just, it's just an awesome thing. I could go on and on about it, but I'm just really proud of what you guys are doing there.
Yeah.
I see guys who are literally not even ever getting out of prison that are taking this recovery housing program seriously because they want to help other men who aren't.
Amen.
Who are
You're
getting out of
right.
prison.
Yeah, I mean, there's men, life without parole. And you're thinking, why?
Why waste your time in this program?
Yeah, why waste your time?
And I asked a guy that, and his answer was because I want to help guys that are getting out.
Exactly.
And like blown away of the unselfishness of that answer.
And plus it is too, it's, they, in that program, Shawn, they realize this is really not only an awesome place for them to live. I mean, it's still 140 degrees in the summer in there. It's not any better. They don't give them air conditioning or anything. But just the fact that you don't have to worry about some guy in your pod high on K2 that's going to come up and they'll tell him what he's going to do.
So true.
So just the fact that you're safe, it's a safe environment, it's a clean environment. It's also a zero tolerance environment.
But it's awesome. That's awesome.
And guys, I was just this last weekend, Shawn, talking to 2 guys who I know from the Michael unit. They're out now, and they're actually going to go in on a Kairos team.
That's cool.
Go back in. And we were talking about this recovery housing. They were saying, and this actually started after they've already been out, but I was explaining it to them, and they're like, wow, structure. Who would have thought? And that's what it is, Shawn.
Structure.
It's structure.
The men
respond to the structure.
We need structure. Yeah, it's so true. It's good. All right, last question. Everyone gets this question.
Okay.
If you had to give one piece of advice or a best piece of advice or a couple pieces of advice, however it wants to be, to either yourself at 16 or a 16-year-old boy nowadays, what would be your advice?
Well, I tell you, I've thought about this because I've listened to a lot of your podcasts, and I knew this question was coming. Here's my answer. I wish I would have put Jesus on the throne at 16. Now, see, I knew about Jesus, but I didn't have a personal relationship with Jesus till I was about 24. But I didn't put him on the throne. And when I say put him on the throne, I mean, am I really living my life the way that he wants me to live? Am I making those decisions? You're familiar with the serenity prayer, right?
Yes, sir.
God grant me serenity
to
accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, wisdom to know the difference. Well, see, God only gives me about 4 things that I can control. I can control the way I think. I can control the way I talk. I can control the way I feel. And I can control my action, what I do. So if I've got a bad thought and I don't have Jesus on the throne, and the enemy tells me that, man, he brings up my past because I don't have a spotless past. He brings up the things that I've messed up, the things I've done to hurt my family or so forth. I can say, wait a minute, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So I've got those 4 things that God has given me control over. Everything else is in God's lane.
It's so good. It's so
Everything
hard.
else is in God's lane.
Such great wisdom. It's so hard to actually do, you know?
Oh, it is. It's tough.
Definitely a challenge.
We're raised as men to solve problems.
Yeah.
You know? So.
No, that's awesome, man. So again, Wayne, thank you for being on the show. I think that you gave some awesome information. It's definitely interesting, and what you're doing is amazing, man. Don't get discouraged. You know what I mean? Stay faithful. I know that leaving those prisons and walking into those prisons is very heavy. It hurts because, you're, pouring into these men who some of these men won't ever get to see outside these gates again, and you get to walk out. And sometimes it feels kind of like guilty. You know what I mean? Like,
well, you're right. I mean, sometimes you think, golly, because when we started this off, Shawn, I said, I was one of those guys. I felt like, why should I go in there and see these guys? They did something wrong or whatever. Well, when we reflect on it, I love second chance mentors, second chance Jim. God is a God of second chances.
Amen.
So who am I to say, hey, because God has blessed my life to keep me out of prison.
Yeah.
Why should I have that attitude? And sometimes it's really hard.
Because that attitude is protecting your feelings and protecting you of having to get your hands dirty. But that's not what God's called you to do, obviously. And that's why you're stepping out.
No. But God has blessed me so much with relationships of men that are now out of prison that I'm able to meet with and visit with. And then I've got so many men in prison that I communicate with, that are like, man, thank you for touching my life.
Yeah. What you're doing is literally, people don't think about it like this. Most of those men behind those fences are going to end up getting out and living next door.
Exactly. You're right.
So
a lot of those men are going to be your neighbor.
Yeah. So don't you want to pour into them and make sure they're going to be good people, or at least do what you can?
Because the Texas Department of Criminal Justice is not rehabilitating them.
No. No prisons really do unless you take advantage of.
No. So, like you say, a lot of these men are going to come out. They're going to be in your church. They're going to be in your neighborhood. Don't you want them on the right track?
Yep.
So.
No, it's great.
Yeah.
It really is. Thanks again for doing the show. Listen, you guys, remember, you're loved and you're forgiven, and there's nothing you can do about it. See you guys next week.